There are corners of Hogwarts that most students pass without ever truly noticing. Quiet spaces where the castle breathes slowly, where magic hums not in flashes or sparks, but in steady, comforting rhythms. Tonight's story begins in one of those gentle places, tucked away from staircases that move too much and corridors that chatter too loudly. It begins behind the kitchens, where warmth lingers in the stone, and the air always carries the faintest trails of bread, herbs, and something sweet that feels like home. This is a tale about a hidden storage room, small, forgotten, and never marked on any map. A place that exists not to surprise or frighten, but to remember. It is a story about quiet magic, the kind that waits patiently until the castle is calm enough to be heard. And as this story unfolds, it will do so slowly, kindly, guiding you through soft discoveries rather than sudden revelations. The night has settled fully over Hogwarts. The Great Hall has gone quiet, its long, tables empty, candles extinguished one by one, until only moonlight glides across the ceiling like a drifting lake of stars. Down below, near the kitchens, the clatter of dishes has faded, and even the house elves have retreated to their rest, leaving behind a gentle warmth that seeps into the flagstones. Lanterns glow low along the kitchen passage, their light golden and steady. Shadows stretch lazily across stone walls, and the air feels calm, safe, almost drowsy. Somewhere deeper in the castle, a clock ticks softly, marking time not as something urgent, but as something kind and unhurried. It is the sort of night where Hogwarts feels especially alive, yet perfectly content to remain still. The castle seemed to lean inward, as if listening to its own memories. If you enjoy drifting through these quiet corners of the wizarding world, you're warmly invited to stay, perhaps by liking this story, subscribing for more gentle journeys, or simply letting yourself return whenever sleep feels just a little too far away. There is no rush here, only the promise of calm. As we move closer to the kitchens, past stone arches warmed by centuries of shared meals and whispered laughter, there is a sense, barely noticeable at first, that something nearby has been waiting, not calling out, not glowing, just waiting patiently for the right moment. And tonight, with the castle settled and the world outside wrapped in darkness, that moment has finally arrived. Behind the kitchens, beyond a stretch of wall no one looks at twice, a hidden storage room rests quietly, ready to open not to the curious or the clever, but to those willing to listen. And so, softly now, the story begins. Harry Potter had always noticed the quieter parts of Hogwarts more than most. Perhaps it was because so much of his life had been shaped by noise, crowds whispering his name, sudden dangers, loud revelations. Over the years, he had learned to cherish the softer moments instead, the spaces where the castle seemed to exhale, the places where nothing was expected of him at all. On this particular evening, Harry walked slowly along the corridor near the kitchens, his steps unhurried, his shoulders relaxed in a way they rarely were during daylight hours. He wasn't supposed to be here for any important reason. No secret mission, no looming threat. Just a quiet walk before returning to Gryffindor Tower, letting the calm of the castle settle his thoughts. Beside him moved Hermione Granger, a book tucked under her arm, though for once she wasn't reading it. She had learned over time that not every moment at Hogwarts needed to be studied or analyzed. Some moments were meant to be felt. Tonight, she glanced around with gentle curiosity, her sharp mind softened by the peaceful atmosphere. "It smells like fresh rolls," she murmured, almost to herself, a small smile forming. The house elves must have finished late. Ron Weasley followed a step behind, hands in his pockets, looking pleasantly tired. He had always loved the kitchens, not just for the food, but for the warmth. There was something grounding about this part of the castle, something that reminded him of home, in a way even the Gryffindor common room sometimes didn't. "Best part of Hogwarts, if you ask me," Ron said quietly. "No moving staircases, no portraits arguing, just warmth." Harry nodded. He felt it too. The way the stone walls held heat, the way the air seemed heavier here, not unpleasantly so, but comfortingly, like a thick blanket on a cold night. They had all changed over the years, grown steadier, more thoughtful. The reckless curiosity of their early days had softened into something gentler, a shared understanding that not every mystery needed to be chased, but some could be welcomed if they appeared on their own. Hermione glanced at Harry, sensing his mood as she often did. "You seem calm tonight." "I feel calm," he replied honestly, like the castle's quieter than usual. Ron chuckled softly, or maybe we're just finally listening. Their footsteps echoed faintly as they moved closer to the kitchens, the sounds of the castle settling around them. Somewhere behind the walls, pipes sighed gently. A distant door clicked shut. Everything felt unhurried, as if Hogwarts itself had decided to slow its pace for the night. None of them knew why they had wandered this way. There had been no plan, no agreement. But sometimes Hogwarts guided its students without words, drawing them gently toward places where something small, kind, and quietly magical waited to be rediscovered. And tonight, without realizing it, Harry, Hermione, and Ron were exactly where they needed to be. They might have walked past it. That, later, was the thought that lingered with Harry the most, that the moment could have slipped by unnoticed, folded into the ordinary quiet of the evening, lost among 100 similar walks taken over the years. The corridor near the kitchens was familiar, its stones worn smooth by centuries of passing feet, its torches dimmed low for the night. Nothing about it demanded attention. And yet, something paused. Harry felt it first, though he couldn't have said how. Not a sound, exactly, nor a movement, but a gentle hesitation in the air itself, as if the corridor had taken a careful breath and was waiting to see whether they would notice. He slowed, his steps instinctively easing to a stop. Hermione noticed immediately. She always did. "What is it?" she asked softly, turning back toward him. Ron took one more step before realizing he was suddenly alone, then stopped too. "Did I miss something?" Harry shook his head, though his eyes were visited, already scanning the walls. "I'm not sure. It just feels like he didn't finish the sentence. The feeling didn't have words yet. It was subtle, like the moment just before sleep, when thoughts begin to drift and time loosens its grip. The torches along the wall flickered, not dramatically, not alarmingly, but with a faint ripple as if stirred by a breeze that wasn't there. Their flames leaned ever so slightly inward toward a section of stone near the floor. Hermione's gaze sharpened, her calm curiosity awakening. That's odd. Ron leaned closer, squinting. Torches do that sometimes, don't they? Drafts and all? Hermione shook her head. Not like this. There's no air current here. As if in response to her words, the warmth of the corridor shifted. The familiar scent of baked bread and simmering soup faded, replaced by something older. Dustier, not unpleasant, just forgotten. Like the smell of a room that hadn't been opened in years. Harry took a slow step forward. The stone wall in front of him looked ordinary at first glance. Same gray blocks, same faint seams between stones. But as he drew closer, the light revealed something else, a hairline outline where there shouldn't have been one, a narrow vertical seam running from knee height to just above his shoulder. Ron frowned. Has that always been there? Hermione crouched, running her fingers lightly along the stone without pressing. No, she said quietly. I would have noticed. The seam shimmered faintly beneath her touch, not glowing, not moving, just acknowledging, like the surface of water when disturbed by a single falling leaf. Harry felt a pull in his chest. Not urgency, not fear, just recognition. This place, he said slowly, it feels like it's been waiting. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the torches dimmed together, as if by silent agreement, lowering the light until the corridor was wrapped in a soft amber hush. The seam in the stone deepened, becoming more defined, not opening, but remembering how to. A faint sound followed, not a creak or grind, but a whisper of movement, like pages turning in a distant library. Hermione's breath caught, though she didn't move back. This isn't a secret passage, she murmured, not in the usual sense. Ron swallowed. That doesn't make me feel better. Harry reached out before thinking too hard about it. His palm pressed gently against the stone, warm beneath his skin. The moment he made contact, a quiet sensation traveled up his arm, not magic, as he'd felt it before, sharp and electric, but something deeper and slower, like the steady pulse of the castle itself. The seam responded. Stone shifted, not sliding away but folding inward, revealing a narrow opening just wide enough for one person at a time. Beyond it lay darkness, not empty, but layered, as if the shadows themselves had depth. And with the opening came a sound, soft footsteps. Hermione stood abruptly, eyes wide. Did you hear that? They all had. The footsteps were distant, measured, unhurried. They echoed not from the corridor behind them, nor from the kitchens nearby, but from within the opening itself, approaching, then stopping, then fading, like a memory replaying itself rather than a person actually walking. Ron's voice dropped to a whisper. No one's been down there, has there? Hermione shook her head slowly. Not recently, possibly not for a very long time. The opening did not grow wider, it didn't beckon, it simply remained, patiently present, as if offering itself without expectation. Harry felt no threat. No warning bells rang in his mind. Instead, a calm settled over him, deep and steady. This wasn't the castle revealing a danger, it was revealing a choice. "What do you think?" Ron asked quietly, looking between them. Hermione hesitated. She studied the edges of the opening, the magic woven so carefully into the stone that it barely registered as magic at all. "Whatever this is," she said, "it's old, protective, thoughtful, not designed to trap or test, more like preserve." Harry nodded, like it didn't want to be forgotten. The corridor behind them remained unchanged. The path back to their dormitory was still open, still safe, still ordinary. Hogwarts wasn't forcing anything, and that was what made the moment feel so significant. Harry stepped closer to the opening, peering inside. The darkness within wasn't complete. Faint shapes suggested shelves, stacked objects, the suggestion of a room rather than a tunnel. The air that drifted out was cool and still, carrying with it the quiet weight of things stored and set aside. "Looks like a room," Ron said, surprised. "Not a passage." Hermione exhaled softly. "A storage room," she said, realization dawning, "but not for supplies, for something else." The footsteps echoed once more, softer this time, then dissolved into silence. With that, the stone trembled faintly, not closing, not retreating, but settling, as if to say, "This is as far as I will go tonight, unless you choose otherwise." Harry pulled his hand back. The stone remained warm, steady beneath the torchlight. "Well," Ron said after a moment, attempting a small smile, "that's definitely the strangest thing that's happened to us this week, and that's saying something." Hermione laughed quietly, the sound easing the tension. "I don't think it's coincidence," she said. "We didn't find this room, it noticed us." Harry looked once more into the dim opening, feeling no rush, no pressure, just a gentle sense that something long unattended had stirred, not to demand attention, but to acknowledge presence. "Maybe not tonight," he said softly, "but now we know it's here." As if satisfied, the torches brightened slightly, returning the corridor to its familiar glow. The opening remained unchanged, neither closing nor expanding, simply waiting. They stood there for a few moments longer, letting the calm return fully, before stepping back together. Behind them, the castle breathed on, and somewhere within its ancient walls, a forgotten room had awakened, quietly, patiently, ready to be remembered when the time felt right. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The hidden storage room seemed content with their silence. The floating lights drifted lazily above, their glow steady and reassuring, as though they were breathing along with the three of them. The shelves stood quietly, not demanding attention, not insisting on explanation. Everything here waited patiently, the way only very old magic could. Harry was the first to move again, though even he did so slowly, carefully, as if sudden motion might break the calm spell the room had wrapped around them. He took a step toward the far wall, where the stone looked slightly different, smoother, warmer in tone, almost polished by countless unseen hands. The air there felt thicker, not heavy, but full in a different way, like standing near a hearth after the fire has settled into glowing embers. Hermione noticed his pause and followed his gaze. "Do you feel that?" she asked quietly. Ron nodded before Harry could answer. "Yeah, it's like the room's thinking." Hermione smiled faintly at the description. "That's not entirely wrong, Ron." Harry reached out, not to touch the wall yet, but to hover his hand near it, the way he had done with the door. The warmth grew more noticeable, gentle and steady, like a reassuring presence. And then the wall changed. Not dramatically, not with grinding stone or booming magic. Instead, a soft ripple passed through it, like the surface of a still pond, disturbed by a single drop of water. The stone shimmered, and faint lines appeared, curving, flowing lines that slowly arranged themselves into shapes. Words. Hermione inhaled sharply, her scholar's instinct waking fully, though she kept her voice hushed. "That's ancient script." Ron frowned. "Ancient, how ancient?" "Older than Hogwarts as we know it," Hermione said, eyes tracing the glowing letters as they settled into place. "But not older than care magic." Harry glanced at her. "Care magic?" Hermione nodded. "Spells and enchantments designed not for power or protection, but for comfort. They're rare. Most witches and wizards don't bother studying them deeply." Ron crossed his arms loosely. "Vigors sounds like something people would forget." The words on the wall glowed a little brighter, as if responding to that thought. Harry leaned closer, reading slowly. The letters seemed to shift just enough to be readable, accommodating him without effort. "This room remembers," Harry read aloud, his voice low and steady. "What is stored here is not meant to be used quickly, nor taken without need." Hermione stepped closer beside him. "Read the rest," Harry continued. "When the castle grows heavy, when its halls echo with unspoken things, this place opens." Ron swallowed. "Unspoken things?" The room answered before anyone else could. A sound rose gently from the shelves, not a noise exactly, but a whisper of movement. Cloth rustled softly, glass jars chimed faintly, as if stirred by a breeze that didn't exist. And then, one by one, objects began to glow. Not all of them, just a few. A folded cloth on a middle shelf shimmered with a pale blue light. A jar of dried lavender glowed softly purple. One of the tin mugs Ron had noticed earlier warmed with a faint amber hue. Hermione's breath caught. "They're responding." "To what?" Ron asked, though his tone had lost its edge. He sounded curious now, open. Harry felt it then, a gentle pull, not toward a specific object, but toward an understanding. This wasn't a room meant to be explored like a mystery to be solved. It was a room that offered something back. Hermione moved first, stepping toward the glowing cloth. She lifted it carefully, as if it were fragile, though it felt sturdy beneath her fingers. The moment she unfolded it, the light softened and spread, bathing her hands and wrists in a gentle glow. Hermione froze, eyes widening slightly, not in fear, but in surprise. I feel calmer, she said softly, like when everything is too loud, and then suddenly it isn't. Harry watched her face relax, her shoulders easing in a way he hadn't noticed they were tense. Ron shifted his weight, glancing between them. Well, he muttered, if it's handing out calm, I wouldn't mind some. Almost immediately, the tin mug in the corner glowed brighter, as if hearing him. Ron blinked. Oi, that thing's looking at me. Hermione smiled gently. I think it's offering. Ron hesitated, then shrugged and picked it up. It was empty, or at least it looked that way, but as soon as his fingers wrapped around it, warmth spread up his hands, not hot, just comforting. Ron exhaled slowly. Feels like holding a cup of tea, he murmured. After a long day, Harry felt something shift in his chest. This room wasn't just storing things. It was storing moments, feelings, small, quiet comforts that Hogwarts had gathered and saved over centuries. He turned back to the wall, where new words were appearing beneath the first inscription. What is kept here, Harry read, returns only what is missing. Hermione looked thoughtful. So it doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you need. Ron snorted softly. That's very Hogwarts. Harry nodded, and very kind. As if acknowledging the word, the floating lights dipped slightly, their glow deepening. Then came the second twist. The far end of the room, where the shelves curved inward, shifted again. A narrow opening appeared, smaller than the door that had brought them here. Beyond it, Harry could see another space, dimmer, quieter. Hermione's eyes widened. There's more. Ron grimaced lightly. Of course there is. Harry felt no fear, only a gentle invitation. They moved together, unhurried. The second space was smaller, more intimate. No shelves lined the walls here. Instead, the stone was bare, warm, and smooth. At the center of the room stood a single table, low and round, carved from old wood. On it lay a book, not a large one, not ancient-looking in the dramatic way, just a simple book, its cover worn, its pages slightly yellowed, no title marked the front. Hermione stepped closer, reverent. Books don't just appear like this. Ron leaned over her shoulder. Maybe it's another seeding plan, he joked weakly, then winced. Sorry, wrong story. Harry smiled faintly, but said nothing. His attention was fixed on the book. As he approached, the book opened by itself, not violently, not suddenly. The cover lifted slowly, the pages turning with a soft whisper until they settled on a single spread. The writing inside wasn't ink, it was light. Words formed gently on the page, glowing faintly, shifting as if adjusting to whoever read them. Harry read aloud without realizing he was doing so. Tonight, the castle remembers what its students forget. Hermione's breath hitched. Forgets what? The page changed. Harry continued, that they are safe, that they are cared for, that not every burden must be carried alone. Ron swallowed hard. Blimey. Harry turned the page gently, though no one had asked him to. The book responded, showing new words. This room opens not only for hunger or tiredness, but for heaviness of heart. Hermione pressed a hand lightly to her chest. It's emotional magic, she whispered, the kind that listens. Harry felt a warmth spread behind his eyes. Not sadness, not exactly. Just something deep and full, like being understood without having to explain. The final lines appeared. When the need is met, the door will fade. When the castle breathes easier, the room will rest. Ron looked around slowly. So, we're not meant to stay long. Hermione nodded. No, just long enough. They stood there for a while after that, not reading, not touching, just existing in the gentle presence of the space. The book's light dimmed softly, its pages closing again on their own. The glowing objects in the outer room faded one by one, their magic returning to a quiet slumber. Harry turned back toward the first room, feeling the calm settle fully now, like the final moments before sleep. The storage shelves looked ordinary again, but not empty. Never empty. When they returned to the doorway, the door was already waiting, open just enough. Harry paused, placing one last look on the room, memorizing the warmth, the quiet kindness of it. Hermione touched the doorframe lightly. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure to whom. The room responded with a soft hum, barely audible. They stepped back into the corridor, and the door closed behind them with that same gentle sound, blending seamlessly into the stone. The seam vanished, the shimmer faded, the portrait of the fruit bowl returned to its cheerful stillness. Ron let out a long breath. "Well," he said quietly, "that was something." Harry nodded, a peaceful smile on his face. "Yeah." Hermione looked between them, her eyes warm. "The castle knew," she said softly. "It always does." As they walked away, the corridor felt lighter somehow, as if the unspoken weight had been lifted, not erased, but eased. Behind them, unseen and unneeded for now, the hidden storage room rested once more, waiting patiently for the next quiet moment when Hogwarts would choose kindness over spectacle and comfort over noise. They walked away from the kitchens at a pace that matched the castle's slow breathing. The corridor behind them looked perfectly ordinary again. Stone, shadow, lantern light. Yet Harry couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, not in the walls, but in the way the night sat around them. Ron was unusually quiet. Hermione was thoughtful in that soft way she became when her mind was turning a mystery over gently, like a warm pebble in her palm. Harry, for his part, felt calm, but it was the kind of calm that comes after hearing a secret you can't unhear. As they climbed the first set of steps away from the kitchen level, the scent followed them. Not strongly, just a faint thread of cinnamon and cloves lingering at the edge of each breath. It didn't belong to any corridor Harry knew, and yet it felt like it belonged to Hogwarts itself, as if the castle had tucked the smell into the air like a reminder. Ron sniffed softly and frowned. Either I'm imagining things, or I can still smell that room. Hermione answered without looking up. You're not imagining it. Magic like that tends to cling. It's comforting enchantment. Gentle spells don't snap away the moment you leave. They fade. Harry's fingers tightened briefly around his wand, though he wasn't using it. Like warmth on your hands after you've held a mug. Ron glanced at him, exactly like that. They turned a corner, and the lantern nearest them flickered, its flame narrowing for a moment, as if something unseen had passed by. It steadied almost immediately, but Hermione stopped. "Did you see?" "I did," Harry said quietly. Ron's eyebrows rose. "You both saw it, and you're both about to pretend that's normal." Hermione didn't scold him. She only listened to the corridor, head tilted slightly, as though paying attention to a sound most people would miss. "It's not dangerous," she said at last, voice calm. "It's responsive." Harry frowned slightly. Responsive to what? Hermione's gaze drifted upward toward the ceiling, where the shadows moved softly as the lantern light shifted. "To us," she said, "or to what we're carrying." Ron made a quiet, uncertain sound. "I'm carrying a deep desire for toast." Hermione's mouth curved, but her eyes stayed thoughtful. "You're carrying more than that, Ron." Ron's expression softened, and he didn't argue. They continued, and the castle seemed to grow quieter the farther they moved from the kitchens. It wasn't an eerie quiet. It was a settling quiet, like snow falling outside a window. Their footsteps became the loudest thing in their small world, and even those were muffled by the thick stone and old rugs that Hogwarts seemed to place in just the right spots. Harry's mind wandered, gentle, slow thoughts. The room remembers what its students forget. It was such a strange sentence, and yet it felt true in a way that had nothing to do with logic. Because Hogwarts did remember. It remembered footsteps. It remembered laughter. It remembered secrets that had once been whispered behind tapestries. It remembered students who'd been lonely, and students who'd been brave, and students who'd been tired in ways no one could see. And now, somehow, it had remembered them. They reached a stairwell that rose toward a quieter wing of the castle. The moving staircases were still, as if even they had decided to rest. A portrait nearby, an old witch with silver hair, snored softly in her frame, chin tipped toward her chest. Ron spoke in a low voice, as if the whole castle were sleeping, and he didn't want to wake it. "So what do we do now?" Hermione looked at him. "We go back to bed," she said simply. Ron blinked. "That's it?" Hermione's tone was gentle but certain. That room wasn't asking us to solve it like a puzzle. It offered comfort. We accepted. We leave it alone. Harry wanted to agree. He did agree, in principle, and yet the warmth in his chest had shifted into something else now, something like a quiet question, not urgent, not demanding, just present. As they climbed, Harry noticed something small on the stone wall beside the stairs. A mark. At first, he thought it was a scratch in the stone, a line where someone had bumped a trunk long ago. But when the lantern light caught it, the mark shimmered faintly, just like the seam had shimmered beside the fruit portrait. Harry stopped. Hermione stopped immediately too, sensing it. Ron halted a heartbeat later, turning with a weary sigh. "What now?" Harry leaned closer. The mark wasn't carved. It was drawn, thin, delicate, like chalk, but glowing softly. It curved into a shape Harry couldn't quite place at first. Hermione's eyes narrowed slightly. "It's a symbol." "A loaf?" Ron guessed, half joking. Hermione shook her head. No, not bread. Harry stared, and then it clicked into place. It's a feather, he said. Ron frowned. A feather? Harry nodded. Like a quill. Hermione stepped closer, her voice softer still. Why would it be here? The feather symbol glowed once, then faded, as if it had done its job simply by being seen. And something else happened at the same time, so quiet that Harry almost missed it. A whisper, not words, not a voice exactly, just the suggestion of paper turning, distant and soft, like someone paging through a book in a quiet room. Hermione heard it too. Her eyes lifted toward the corridor above the stairs. That sound. Ron's face tightened slightly. Please tell me that's just Hogwarts being Hogwarts. Harry didn't answer right away. He listened. The whisper came again, paper turning, then stopping, as if whoever or whatever was turning the pages had found something and was lingering. Harry felt a pull, not toward danger, but toward something unfinished. The storage room had given them comfort, yes, but now it felt like the castle was gently nudging them toward a second step, not to take, to understand. Hermione exhaled slowly. It's leading us. Ron looked between them, resignation softening into reluctant curiosity. Fine, he muttered, but if we end up in Filch's office, I'm blaming both of you. They followed the direction Hermione had looked, climbing the stairs with slow care. The corridors here were narrower, older, the stone darker with age. The lanterns were spaced farther apart, leaving pockets of gentle shadow between each warm pool of light. Halfway down the hall, another symbol appeared, this time on a suit of armor, a feather again, drawn faintly on its breastplate. The armor itself remained still, but its helmet seemed to tilt slightly as they passed, as though acknowledging them. Hermione didn't touch it. She didn't need to. It's a trail, she murmured. Ron let out a soft breath. A trail made of quills. Harry's heart stayed steady. No fear, just that suspense, the kind that doesn't race but deepens, like a story being told slowly by candlelight. They turned another corner, and the air changed. It grew cooler, not cold, just crisp, like stepping into a room that has been empty for a while. The scent of cinnamon faded, replaced by something else, old ink, parchment, and the faintest trace of dust. Hermione's eyes brightened a little. This smells like a classroom. Ron groaned under his breath. Oh, brilliant. Nothing says bedtime like homework. But even Ron's complaint was soft, almost fond, because the corridor ahead didn't feel punishing or strict. It felt hushed, like a place where voices had once been raised in lessons, but now only echoes remained. At the very end of the corridor stood a door, not hidden in stone, not shimmering into existence, just a plain wooden door with a small brass plaque. The plaque was tarnished, the letters worn. Harry stepped closer, reading slowly. Storage, the plaque said. Ron blinked. We've done storage. Are we collecting them now? Hermione frowned gently. No, this isn't the same. Harry noticed the handle next. The brass was polished, not by constant use, but by careful the touch. And just above it, carved faintly into the wood, was the feather symbol again. Harry didn't reach for the handle yet. He paused, listening. The sound of paper turning came again, closer now, softer, as if it were just on the other side of the door. Hermione's voice was barely a whisper. "Someone's in there." Ron's eyes widened slightly. At this hour? Harry felt the suspense settle in. Not sharp, not alarming, but deep and curious. Whoever, or whatever, was behind that door didn't feel like a threat. It felt like the next page of the night. Harry lifted his hand and knocked gently. Once, the sound was quiet in the corridor, like tapping on a sleeping world. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the paper sound stopped, and from behind the door came a different sound. Soft footsteps, light and careful, crossing a wooden floor. Hermione held her breath, but she didn't look afraid. Ron looked tense, but not panicked. Harry stood steady, as if the castle itself were standing with him. The handle turned slowly, and the door opened just a crack, only enough for warm, amber light to spill out, painting their faces in a gentle glow. Harry couldn't see inside fully, only a sliver, rows of shelves, stacks of parchment, and one small floating candle that burned with an unusually steady flame. And then a voice spoke, calm and familiar, like a teacher who never raised their tone, even when correcting you. "Mr. Potter," said Professor Flitwick. Harry blinked in surprise, relief washing through him. "Professor?" Flitwick's eyes twinkled in the candlelight, but his expression was gentle and thoughtful. He looked tired, but not in a harsh way, more like someone who had stayed up late to finish something important. Hermione's voice was soft. "Professor Flitwick, what are you doing here?" Flitwick opened the door a little wider, and the warm light widened with it. "Ah," he said quietly, "I was hoping the castle might send you." Ron stared. "The castle can send people?" Flitwick's smile deepened, kind and knowing. "When it wants to," he said, "and when the moment is right." Harry felt the quiet suspense bloom again. Not fear, not urgency, just the gentle certainty that they had stepped into something old, tender, and quietly magical, and it was only just beginning to unfold. The door opened a little wider, and the warmth that spilled into the corridor felt almost like a blanket placed gently over their shoulders. It wasn't the heat of a roaring fire, but the steady comfort of a room that had been lived in quietly, ink and parchment and candle wax, with the faint sweetness of something herbal, like chamomile. Professor Flitwick stood just inside, his small frame outlined by the amber glow. A floating candle hovered above his shoulder, its flame impossibly calm, as if it had decided that flickering would be far too dramatic for a night like this. Harry took a cautious step forward, careful not to crowd the doorway. Hermione followed, eyes scanning the shelves with that familiar blend of curiosity and respect. Ron lingered half a step behind, as though he expected the room to suddenly turn into something unpleasant. Filch's broom cupboard, perhaps, or a stack of old detention forms that would leap at him. Flitwick's expression softened when he saw them fully. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice quiet enough to match the sleeping castle. Harry blinked. We didn't know we were coming." Flitwick chuckled softly. "Quite all right. Most of the best journeys at Hogwarts begin without a map." Hermione stepped a fraction closer, her gaze catching on the piles of parchment stacked neatly along the back table. Some of the pages were rolled and tied with ribbon, others pressed flat beneath small weights. The ribbons weren't bright, showy colors. They were muted, faded blue, pale gold, gentle green, like the softened colors of old house banners after years of candle smoke and time. "Professor," Hermione said carefully, "why are you here so late?" Flitwick glanced toward the shelves, and for the first time, a flicker of something passed through his expression, something like quiet worry, but wrapped in warmth. "I was putting something away," he said, "something that should have been put away a long time ago." Ron frowned. "Like what? Detention slips?" Flitwick's smile returned, but this time it held a hint of tenderness. "Not detention slips, Mr. Weasley, though I admire your dedication to that particular theme." Ron opened his mouth, then closed it again, deciding not to argue. Flitwick motioned them inside with a small sweep of his hand. "Come, step gently. The room doesn't like to be startled." That sentence alone made Harry's skin prickle, not with fear, but with a renewed sense of wonder. He stepped across the threshold. The floorboards creaked softly under his feet, not loudly enough to echo, just enough to remind him that this place was real. Hermione entered next, then Ron, who muttered, all right," under his breath, like someone trying to convince himself he was perfectly calm. Inside, the storage room looked different from the one behind the fruit portrait, and yet Harry could feel the same kind of magic woven through it, quiet and listening. This room was smaller, packed with teaching materials, boxes labeled in careful handwriting, stacks of spell diagrams, worn practice targets, and jars filled with feathers, bits of twine, and tiny silver bells. A small chalkboard leaned against the wall. On it, a single line was written in delicate script, shimmering faintly as if the chalk itself held enchantment. "A spell is also a kindness." Hermione read it silently, then looked at Flitwick with gentle surprise. Flitwick followed her gaze and nodded. "I wrote that many years ago," he said, "when I was a younger teacher and much less patient." Ron's eyebrows rose. "Less patient than you are now?" Flitwick chuckled. "Oh yes, you would have found me quite strict." Harry couldn't imagine it. Flitwick was one of the gentlest teachers they had, firm when needed, but always kind. The idea of him being strict felt like imagining a warm teacup becoming a block of ice. Flitwick moved to the table where a small wooden box sat closed. It wasn't locked. It didn't need to be. The box itself looked ordinary, but the air around it felt subtly charged, like the moment before you open a letter that might change your day. Harry's quiet suspense returned, steady as a heartbeat. Flitwick rested his fingertips on the lid, but didn't open it yet. Instead, he turned to them. "This is where you make a choice," he said gently. Hermione's eyes sharpened. "A choice?" Flitwick nodded. "It's one thing to be guided by the castle. It's another to decide you truly wish to know what it's showing you." He glanced at each of them in turn. "If you choose to leave now, you will be perfectly safe. You will sleep, and by morning, the details will feel like a dream you can't quite hold." Ron shifted. "That doesn't sound terrible, honestly." Flitwick smiled. That is exactly why it works, Mr. Weasley. Hogwarts does not punish you for choosing rest. Harry glanced at Hermione. She looked calm, but her eyes were bright with that soft determination she got when she sensed a piece of forgotten magic. We should stay, Hermione said quietly, not because we have to, because it feels important. Ron sighed, but there was no real complaint in it. Fine, he said, voice gentler. We've come this far, and it's not like I'm getting back to bed quickly now anyway. Harry looked at Flitwick. We'll stay, he said simply. Flitwick's shoulders eased, as though he had been holding a small weight and was glad to set it down. Thank you, he murmured, and then, with great care, he lifted the lid of the box. Inside was not a wand or a cursed object or anything sharp or frightening. Inside lay a stack of parchment, only 5 or 6 pages, each one covered in neat, looping handwriting. The ink had faded slightly with age, but the letters were still clear. Along the edges of the pages, tiny charms shimmered, like a protective border made of soft light. Hermione leaned in, eyes widening. Professor, these are lesson notes. Flitwick nodded. Lesson notes, he agreed, for a spell I once meant to teach, a spell I intended to share with my students, and then didn't. Ron blinked. You forgot? Flitwick's expression turned thoughtful. Not exactly. He looked at the parchment as if it were an old memory. I hesitated. Harry felt the room settle, as though it were listening again. Hermione lifted her gaze. Why would you hesitate to teach a spell? Flitwick's smile returned, small and sad, and kind at once. Because some spells are powerful, not because they harm, he said, voice soft as the candlelight, but because they change what a person believes they can endure alone. The words landed in Harry's chest with quiet weight. Ron's voice was low. That sounds like a good spell. Flitwick nodded slowly. It is, and that is precisely why it matters. Harry realized then that this wasn't just about a hidden room or magic tucked behind the kitchens. It was about the kind of magic that doesn't impress crowds, the kind that doesn't sparkle loudly or burst into fireworks. It was the magic that helps you breathe when your chest feels too tight, the magic that tells you, gently, patiently, that you are not forgotten. Flitwick looked at them again, and his eyes twinkled with something deeper than amusement. So, he said, will you help me do what I should have done long ago? Hermione nodded immediately. Ron nodded a moment later, slower but sincere. Harry nodded last, feeling the decision settle into him like warmth. Yes, Harry said softly, we will. And the candle above them burned on, steady and calm, as if the castle itself approved of the choice they had just made. Professor Flitwick lifted the top page from the stack of parchment, handling it as though it were something alive, something that could be startled if moved too quickly. The candle's flame leaned closer, brightening just enough to make the ink shimmer into clearer focus. This, Flitwick said gently, is not a spell meant for dueling, nor for display. It was never intended to be spoken aloud in a crowded classroom. He paused, then added, it was meant to be felt. Harry leaned forward slightly, drawn in by the quiet gravity of the moment. Hermione stood very still, hands folded at her waist, eyes intent. Ron's usual fidgeting had stopped altogether. Flitwick cleared his throat softly. I called it communio lumen, the shared light. Hermione inhaled quietly. A stabilizing charm? Flitwick nodded. Partly, but more than that. It's a spell that gathers what a person carries inside, the exhaustion they don't speak of, the worries they tuck away, and allows it to rest, briefly, in the presence of others, not transferred, not erased, simply acknowledged. Ron blinked. So it doesn't fix things? Flitwick smiled kindly. No, Mr. Weasley, it does something much harder. He looked at each of them in turn. It reminds the caster that they are not alone in feeling them. The words settled over the room like a soft cloak. Harry felt something shift inside his chest, not sharply, not painfully, just a quiet easing, as though a knot he hadn't realized he was holding had loosened on its own. Hermione spoke after a moment. Why didn't you teach it? Flitwick's gaze drifted to the shelves, to the jars of feathers and bells, to the chalkboard with its gentle reminder. Because I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid of asking students to be still enough to notice themselves. Afraid of what might surface when they did. Ron frowned, but Hogwarts students deal with dangerous stuff all the time. Yes, Flitwick agreed softly, and they are praised for bravery, for endurance, for surviving. His voice grew quieter, but very few spells ever tell them it's all right to rest. Harry swallowed. He thought of long nights in the dormitory, lying awake while others slept, of worries that came unannounced and stayed far too long, of moments when courage felt less like standing tall and more like simply getting through the next breath. Flitwick placed the parchment back on the table and stepped away from it. The spell does not require words, he said, only intention and a willingness to stand together. Hermione looked up. Together? Flitwick nodded. That is the heart of it. One person may begin it, but it completes itself through connection. Ron scratched the back of his neck. So, what happens? Flitwick gestured gently to the space between them. You'll see. He moved back a few steps, giving them room. The candle floated higher, its glow spreading, soft and even, until it illuminated all three of them equally. No shadows sharpened, no edges glared. Close your eyes, Flitwick said, if you wish. Harry did. For a moment, there was nothing but the steady rhythm of his breathing and the faint crackle of the candle. He became aware of Hermione beside him, her presence calm, focused, Ron on the other side, solid, familiar, grounding. Flitwick's voice came again, barely above a whisper. Think of something you've been carrying quietly. Harry didn't have to search. The thought rose naturally, like a tide. Not one thing, many things. Responsibility, loss, the constant sense of being watched, expected, needed. He felt no pressure to push them away. Now, Flitwick continued, do nothing with it. Simply let it exist. Harry exhaled slowly. Something warm spread through the room. Not heat, not light exactly, but a sense of gentle presence. It felt as though the air itself had thickened into something comforting. Hermione felt it too. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly. Ron's breathing evened out. The candle's glow softened further, and Harry sensed, not saw, but sensed, threads of light forming between them. Not binding, not tight, just there, like lines drawn in chalk that could be wiped away at any time. He became aware of Hermione's quiet determination, her endless striving to be prepared, to be enough. He felt Ron's warmth, his humor worn thin by worry he rarely voiced, and in return, without effort, he felt his own weight lighten, not because it had vanished, but because it was no longer his alone. A realization unfolded, gentle and profound. This was the spell, not magic imposed from outside, but magic awakened between people who chose to stand, close and honest and still. Harry opened his eyes. The room looked the same, and yet it didn't. The shelves seemed less crowded, the parchment less heavy. Even the stone walls felt kinder. Hermione's eyes were damp, but she was smiling softly. Ron blinked a few times and cleared his throat, looking embarrassed but peaceful. Flitwick watched them with quiet satisfaction. "You see now," he said. Harry nodded. "It doesn't change what's waiting for you tomorrow." "No," Flitwick agreed, "but it changes how alone you feel when you meet it." Hermione stepped closer to the table. "You didn't forget this spell," she said gently. "You protected it." Flitwick smiled, a little sadly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I simply wasn't ready to trust that others would understand it." Ron huffed quietly. "Seems like Hogwarts understands it just fine." As if in agreement, the room gave a soft creak, not unsettling, but contented, like a chair settling after someone sits down. Flitwick's gaze softened even further. "The castle remembers moments like this," he said. "That is why it led you here." Harry felt a quiet certainty settle over him. This wasn't a secret meant to stay hidden forever. It was a lesson meant to be rediscovered when needed. Flitwick gathered the parchment carefully and placed it back into the box. "The spell does not need to be taught formally," he said. "It lives now, in memory, in practice." Hermione nodded. "We'll remember." Ron smiled faintly. "Yeah, I think I already am." Flitwick closed the box and rested his hand on it once more. "Then my work tonight is done." The candle dimmed slightly, returning to its earlier, steadier glow. Harry felt calm, not the sleepy calm that pulls you under, but the deep calm that stays with you even after you wake. The revelation had come quietly, without spectacle or applause, and somehow that made it feel all the more true. The room did not rush them back into motion. After the candle's glow settled into its gentle, familiar steadiness, there was a long, comfortable pause, one of those rare silences that feels complete rather than empty. Harry became aware again of the small details, the faint scent of parchment and wax, the soft ticking of a clock somewhere beyond the walls, the quiet certainty that nothing urgent demanded their attention. Professor Flitwick moved first, but even his steps were unhurried. He placed the small wooden box back onto its shelf with care, as though returning a book to a library that knew it by heart. When his hand lingered for a moment on the edge of the shelf, it was not hesitation, it was gratitude. "You may go back to your evening now," he said gently. No rules broken, no marks taken or given. A small smile touched his face. Some lessons do not need to be written down. Hermione let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Ron rolled his shoulders, as if loosening stiffness that had built up over days rather than minutes. Harry felt an unfamiliar sensation, not relief exactly, but steadiness, like standing on solid ground after a long walk across shifting stones. They thanked Professor Flitwick quietly and made their way to the door. As Harry reached for the handle, he hesitated just for a second, then glanced back. "Professor?" Flitwick looked up. "Will the room change now?" Harry asked. "That we've used it?" Flitwick's eyes twinkled softly. "Rooms like this do not disappear," he said. "They rest, and when they are needed again, they remember how to listen." The door opened without a sound. The corridor beyond was dim, bathed in the warm glow of distant torches. The castle had shifted into its nighttime rhythm. Stairs paused in thoughtful places. Portraits whispered among themselves, and the air itself seemed to breathe more slowly. As they stepped out, Harry felt the gentle hum of Hogwarts wrap around them again, familiar and reassuring. The door behind them closed softly, not sealing anything away, merely marking a moment that had finished what it came to do. They walked together in easy silence. Their footsteps echoed faintly on the stone, not sharp or loud, but rhythmic and grounding. Ron let out a small yawn, stretching his arms above his head. "Didn't know how tired I was till now," he murmured. Hermione smiled. "That happens when you stop trying to carry everything at once." Harry didn't speak, but he felt the truth of it settle into him. The worries he carried hadn't vanished, but they felt quieter, less demanding, like books placed back on a shelf rather than scattered across the floor. They passed a window overlooking the dark grounds. The moonlight lay silver and calm across the lawns, the lake barely rippling, the forest beyond standing watch without menace. Everything was exactly as it should be. By the time they reached the staircase leading toward Gryffindor Tower, Ron's steps had slowed. His earlier energy softened into something drowsy and content. Hermione tucked her hands into her sleeves, shoulders relaxed. The fat lady greeted them with a sleepy smile and swung open the portrait hole without fuss. Inside the common room, the fire burned low, its embers glowing softly. A few students sat reading or talking in murmurs, but most of the space had surrendered to quiet. Harry paused just inside the doorway. For a brief moment, he felt the echo of the room they had left behind, the shared stillness, the unspoken understanding, and realized it hadn't stayed there. It had come with them. He climbed the stairs to the dormitory, feeling lighter, his thoughts slower, more forgiving. As he changed and settled into bed, the sounds of the castle faded into background comfort. Wind against stone, distant footsteps, the soft settling of old walls. The day had not ended with excitement or triumph. It had ended with calm. And as Harry closed his eyes, the warmth of that calm lingered, steady, patient, and quietly reassuring, guiding him gently toward rest. As the castle eased deeper into the night, everything settled into its oldest and kindest rhythm. The staircases paused where they were, content to wait until morning. The portraits grew still, their whispered conversations fading into dreams of their own. Even the wind outside seemed to soften its voice as it brushed gently against the towers and windows of Hogwarts. In the quiet of the dormitory, Harry lay comfortably beneath warm blankets, the familiar scent of clean linen and old wood surrounding him. His breathing slowed naturally, without effort, without thought. The day, its questions, its quiet discoveries, no longer asked anything of him. It had given what it came to give, and now it allowed him rest. Somewhere deep within the castle, the hidden storage room behind the kitchens returned to its peaceful waiting. Shelves rested in perfect order. The candle's flame remained steady, neither brighter nor dimmer, simply present. It did not mind being unseen. It understood that being useful did not always mean being noticed. Hogwarts itself seemed to know this truth. The castle has always been a place of movement and magic, of lessons and laughter, but it is also a place of pauses, of rooms that wait patiently, of moments that arrive softly, do their work, and leave without announcement. And just like those quiet rooms, you are allowed to rest too. You do not need to solve every mystery tonight. You do not need to hold every thought, replay every moment, or prepare for what comes next. For now, it is enough to simply be here, to breathe slowly, to let your body grow heavier, to allow the gentle warmth of the story to fade into comfort. If your thoughts drift, let them wander like lantern light along familiar corridors. If sleep comes quickly, welcome it. If it takes its time, that is all right too. There is no hurry in a place like this. The castle will still be standing when morning comes. The magic will still be there. The rooms that wait will continue to wait. And you, right now, are safe, calm, and held in quiet stillness. So let your breathing slow just a little more. Let the last traces of the day loosen their grip. Let the warmth of this gentle night carry you onward. As the final embers glow softly and the world grows quieter still, may you drift into sleep with the same peaceful certainty as the castle itself, knowing that rest is not something you must earn, but something you are always allowed to receive. Good night.